Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 15th of September. I'm Caroline Hepke in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, China's economy weakens sharply as expectations mount for Beijing to deliver a stimulus boost.
Pressure grows on Keir Starmer as the UK Prime Minister tries to shift focus to Donald Trump's state visit.
Plus, the Pope uses his first interview to criticise excessive CEO pay and Elon Musk potentially becoming the world's first trillionaire.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
China's economic activity slowed across the board in August as industrial output and consumption had their worst month yet this year. Economists now expect a notable slowdown in third quarter GDP, with the government's 5% growth target possibly in jeopardy without major stimulus from Beijing. Jing Liu is HSBC's chief economist for Greater China.
It's actually a big missing across the board. I think all numbers point to the softness in the middle of the year. Probably for Chinese policymakers who are data dependent, they look at this data and probably will start to think about what kind of extra policies they want to roll out.
Jing Liu speaking there as a slew of disappointing data sets in recent weeks already pointed to growing weakness in the economy. A broad measure of credit slowed last month for the first time this year, while export growth fell short of forecasts and dropped to 4.4% in August. The labour market also likely weakened in recent months based on purchasing managers' index surveys and private polls.
US and Chinese representatives discussed trade, national security and the economy during high-level talks in Madrid over the weekend. A senior Treasury official said the delegations, led by US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, met for almost 6 hours yesterday. The fate of the video app TikTok, which is owned by Chinese company ByteDance, was on the agenda too. It faces a deadline this week to reach a deal to continue its operations in the US. Trump says that the talks are, quote, going fine, and Beijing's actions will determine TikTok's future.
They're negotiating TikTok right now. We may let it die, or we may, I don't know, it depends, up to China. It doesn't matter too much. I'd like to do it for the kids that like it. I mean, selfishly speaking, I did very well on TikTok, and I got the youth for it.
US President Donald Trump speaking there outside Air Force One as officials are expected to lay the groundwork for a meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping as soon as October, when they're scheduled to both attend a summit in South Korea.
The UK government is defending its decision to sack its ambassador to the US on the eve of President Trump's visit to Britain. Prime Minister Keir Starmer fired Peter Mandelson after Bloomberg reported details of private emails showing Mandelson's ties to disgraced paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Business Secretary Peter Kyle told the BBC that the government would not have hired him had they known about the depth of the relationship.
On balance, based on what was known publicly, based on what we knew and you knew as journalists, the decision was taken to appoint him. And then I have to say that in that period, we have navigated the most difficult period in the US-UK relationship since the Second World War, and we have delivered for people in Britain, time after time after time.
Kyle became Business Secretary 2 weeks ago in a major government reshuffle. The scandal now threatens to cast a shadow over the 3-day state visit by President Trump, where the US and UK are expected to sign agreements on nuclear energy and technology.
The Federal Reserve is likely to cut interest rates this week for the first time in Donald Trump's second term. Central banks in 2/5 of the global economy make rate decisions in the next few days, with the Fed seen as a key bellwether. Markets are expecting policymakers to line up a series of cuts, but Bloomberg opinion columnist John Authers says that he's not sure there will be a clear signal.
I think it will be an all options open. I don't think we're going to get a really clear dovish steer. I doubt it'll be a particularly hawkish cut either. I don't think there'll be a clear sign that's your lot. So much we still need to find out about whether those tariffs begin to feed through into inflation. They are feeding through into inflation in a very small way thus far, but it's plainly there.
Alongside John Author's view, the US president has predicted a, quote, big cut after putting pressure on the Federal Reserve. Central banks in Canada, the UK and Japan also announced rate decisions in the 36 hours after the Fed's decision.
Germany's far-right party tripled its support in local elections in the country's most populous state, North Rhine-Westphalia. The anti-immigration Alternative for Germany increased its share of the vote to almost 15%. It remained behind Chancellor Friedrich Merz's Christian Democrats and his coalition partners, the Social Democrats. The AfD narrowly missed winning the mayoral race in the industrial city of Gelsenkirchen, according to preliminary results. The first electoral test for Merz's new government came as the Metropolitan Police says between 110 and 150,000 protesters joined an anti-migrant march in central London on Saturday. The protest was organised by the far-right activist Tommy Robinson and addressed by Elon Musk.
Romania yesterday protested the entry of a Russian drone into its airspace during an attack on neighbouring Ukraine. Bucharest summoned Moscow's ambassador to the foreign ministry over the incident. The intrusion came only days after Poland said that it had shot down Russian drones that crossed its border. Former US ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, says the events show Europe must improve its air defences along NATO's eastern border.
This response by NATO is a good indication of what NATO can do. But it's also a good indication of what NATO needs to do. They need to learn from the Ukrainians. Ukrainians know how to knock down drones and doing it without very expensive missiles. The Ukrainians have a lot of experience on this. They get 4, 5, 6, 700 a night. While I was in Ukraine, we got 800 a night one time in Ukraine. So they know how to knock these down. They have a 90%, 80% success rate. NATO needs to learn from that. And yes, I think NATO could consider putting that kind of cover over the western part of Ukraine.
Former US ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, speaking there. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, condemned the breach of Romanian airspace as a reckless escalation by Moscow. Meanwhile, US President Trump said over the weekend that he is prepared to move ahead with major sanctions on Russian oil if NATO countries do the same. Trump wrote that replacing 50 to 100% tariffs on China will also be of great help in ending, quote, this deadly but ridiculous war in Ukraine.
And those are our top stories on the programme. On the markets this morning, we're looking at Chinese equities rallying. The CSI 300 up by 0.6%. The MSCI China Index 0.3 higher today. On currency markets, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index a little weaker ahead of this week's Federal Reserve decision. The euro starting the week at 117.33. The pound a touch stronger at 135.66. Oil prices rising today as well. Looking at Brent crude up by 0.5% to $67.33.
So those are the markets. In a moment, we're going to bring you more on the latest data on the state of China's economy and also Pope Leo. Now, he has been talking about Elon Musk's wealth, but then something else caught our attention, the Emmys.
Well, if there's any advantage to getting up in the middle of the night, it's that you get to watch the American award shows happen as they, or rather the results of them come in as they happen. So the big headline is that 15-year-old Owen Cooper has become the youngest male to win an acting Emmy. He won supporting actor in a drama series for adolescents, of course, a programme that caused huge waves when it aired about a teenage boy arrested for the murder of a female classmate. So that's a big winner from there as well. A couple of other perhaps more familiar or longer standing names. Noah Wiley winning Best Actor in a Drama for his work on The Pit. Of course became famous in ER, so perhaps he's typecast as a TV doctor now. Is there anything he'll ever be allowed to play as well? Some good cameos during the show as well, including the stars of the Gilmore Girls, Alexis Bledel and Lauren Graham. Had a bit the first time they've reunited on stage since the reboot of the series there, making jokes about how long scripts were, because famously it was a show where the dialogue was very dense, but they were presenting an award for script writing.
Okay, so that on the Emmys, good stuff.
Let's bring you more now on that latest economic data from China as we're watching for developments from the trade talks with the US, which are happening in Madrid. Our Chief Asia correspondent, Ros Matheson, joins us now for more. Ros, let's start then with the data covering August. What picture is emerging of the state of the world's second largest economy from this latest set of numbers?
Well, it's a slightly concerning picture because, of course, we had a bit of front-loading, it seems, on the export side as we were coming into some of these tariff changes, and that potentially supported the Chinese economy. But when you look at the across-the-board figures today, you know, everything from consumption to retail sales to fixed asset investment, it's clear that on the domestic side, consumption demand is slipping, and that's, you know, an ongoing concern for the government there, because really the engine of the economy is the domestic side, and you've got across the board, you know, the sense that things are slowing, that people aren't spending, that companies are also not spending, you know, the infrastructure is slowing down, and at the same time you've got concerns, you know, about the outlook for the housing market, and, you know, the need to avoid, you know, if you're going to stimulate your economy at this point, not to create bubbles at the same time, which has always been a pattern for China, is to avoid creating patterns both in the market and the housing market.
Well, does it mean that stimulus is more likely then now? I mean, there's so much anticipation, and has been for months, about ramping up of stimulus.
Well, that's right, and they have announced some steps on that front, but it seems every time they announce a stimulus package, it does disappoint the market, which is looking for more. I mean, they do have some levers they can use. There's the interest rates. There's also the way that they set the yuan, which can be a factor as well. They could lean into infrastructure spending and try and push up infrastructure again, because that can be a good way to get broad levers of the economy moving. But again, you know, in all of that, you've got to be careful not to speed things up too much, and certainly not to overheat certain sectors of the economy, including the housing market, where they're very, very sensitive to the potential for bubbles. And of course, the stock market's been doing fairly well after a rough start this year, and there is concern about letting some of the air out of the stock market without, again, crashing it too quickly or anything. So there's a lot of delicate things there to balance in terms of stimulus, but certainly the expectation is that they need to do something pretty soon.
Or at the same time, we're watching for any news out of the latest round of US-China trade talks happening in Madrid. What have they been discussing so far, and what sort of progress could we expect?
Well, they met for about 6 hours yesterday, and then some lower-level officials kept talking last night. So there's a lot of conversation, at least, going on, and obviously talks resuming today. Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, does have to get to the UK at some point because Donald Trump is visiting this week, but there is room for further talks, at least through today. It's a bit of a grab bag of stuff they're discussing. Includes TikTok, because that's a deadline that's coming up yet again. I mean, Donald Trump has rolled it over multiple times, and maybe he does so again. But also the broader China-US trade truce has a deadline that's coming. And the idea behind all of this seems to be to get everything knitted away, to have a summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, probably late October in Asia, perhaps around the time of the APEC summit in Korea. And to do that, you've got to get a proper understanding of where this trade truce is going, and what a formal deal that's not just a temporary deal is going to look like, so the two of them can then announce it at their summit. That's the whole goal, is to get everything squared away so they can present something together at this summit. So there's been conversations not just around TikTok, but obviously all the parameters of the trade deal, and a lot of other stuff too, still like fentanyl and so on.
Okay, so something we'll continue to think about. Ros, thank you so much for being with us. That is Ros Matheson, Bloomberg's Chief Asia Correspondent. Thank you so much. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. The Pope has singled out Elon Musk's wealth as part of criticism of the widening pay gap between company bosses and working class people. Pope Leo was speaking to the Catholic news website Crux in his first interview since becoming pontiff. Our reporter Tiwa Adebayo joins us now for more on this story. Tiwa, what did the Pope have to say about Elon Musk?
Well, yeah, Caroline, this was an interview that he gave to the Catholic website Crux over the summer, shortly after he became Pope, but it was published over the weekend for his 70th birthday. And the interview is actually part of an upcoming biography being written about him, published by Penguin Peru. And he discussed a range of things, but amongst those was the widening pay gap that he sees between corporate bosses and their staff. And to illustrate this, he used Elon Musk as an example, pointing out that he was set to become the first trillionaire in the world. Those comments were made just weeks before Tesla unveiled a plan which could see Musk awarded $1 trillion over the next decade if he hits a series of corporate targets at Tesla. But it's important to point out that Pope Leo made clear in this interview that Elon Musk isn't the only example of this widening pay gap that he sought to emphasize. It was really more of a commentary on the direction that the world is going and this increasing focus on wealth that he describes. And he talks about that focus contributing to what he says is a loss of a higher sense of what human life is about. So really a wide-ranging interview which covered, amongst many things, the wealth inequality that Pope Leo sees in the world.
How unusual is it to hear these kinds of comments from a pope, Tua?
It's not entirely unusual to hear these comments from a pope. It's in line with the theology that his predecessor, Pope Francis, who was notoriously frugal, promoted. Back in 2022, in the wake of the pandemic, Pope Francis appealed to entrepreneurs to share wealth, citing the biblical example of the Good Samaritan who offered charity to a stranger. He also challenged financial leaders to help push forward international development, and he also condemned tax breaks for the wealthy. So it's definitely something we've seen before from a pope. But indeed, more broadly than economic affairs, we also heard Pope Francis speak very often, almost up until his death, about geopolitical affairs such as, the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East. So this sort of commentary is not outside the realm of what we might expect from a pope. But for Pope Leo, at least, I think it does set the tone for the rest of his papacy. And actually, it's consistent with his theology to date. I mean, he chose the name Pope Leo in recognition of the previous Pope Leo, who served during the 1800s, and he was known for promoting labor rights during the Industrial Revolution. So perhaps we should have had an inclination that this Pope Leo would also speak out about similar issues.
That is interesting. In terms of what else he said in the interview, what stood out?
Well, I mean, it was very wide-ranging. He even criticised the UN for a lack of efficacy when it comes to international affairs, and he gave us some insight about how he's adapting to the role of Pope. He said it's a huge learning curve, but he also added some interesting anecdotes about feeling both American and Peruvian. Of course, he was born in Chicago, but spent 20 years as a missionary in Peru. He even spoke about his childhood as a fan of the baseball team, the White Sox, and how he learned about tolerance from an early age because his mum supported the rival Cubs team. But I think what was really interesting from my perspective is that he talked about being thrust into the role of a world leader as Pope, and that perhaps suggests a commitment to engage politically as part of his papacy. It certainly tells us a bit about how he sees his role as Pontifex, and perhaps will give us some insight into the future in terms of how he intends to carry out this job as head of the Catholic Church.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.